You're listening to WeAreSTS, a podcast from the Department of Science and Technology Studies at University College London. Hi everybody, and welcome back to WeAreSTS. I'm your host, Professor Joe Kane. This is episode 11. In this episode, we talk with Dr. Carina Fearnley. She's an associate professor in science communication here in STS. Carina is an expert in disaster warning and public engagement. Her research focuses on ways to improve the effectiveness of warning systems. Carina's contributed a lot to communication around risk and warning during the pandemic. Her long-term research focuses on volcano and tsunami warning systems around the world, with projects undertaken in places like Iceland, South America, the Middle East, and all across Europe. This is real-world, life-saving public engagement, folks. Carina has been a leader in organizing UCL's Warning Research Center. The center brings academic and industry people together to focus on specific cases and on fundamentals. This is a relatively new part of STS, but it's making quite the impression. I spoke with Carina a few months ago, just after she gave testimony to the UK House of Lords on how the country can prepare for extreme risks in the future. The Select Committee's report has just been published, so it's a good time to hear Carina talk about her work, talk about the new center, and talk about her experience giving testimony at the House of Lords. I mean, what's it like consulting at the very heart of government? I begin by asking Carina to introduce herself.
Hello, I am Dr. Carina Fearnley. I am Associate Professor in the Department of Science and Technology Studies and also Director of the newly founded UCL Warning Research Center. I have a background in geology, which I studied at undergraduate, and then a master's in mining. And then I spent 3 years working in the London city in the financial sector, looking at credit risk and managing small junior mining companies onto the alternative investment market. And then I was inspired by the events of the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004 in Indonesia, in the sense that I couldn't understand why so many people died. Nearly 250,000 people died from an earthquake and a tsunami. And I could quickly see that there was a complete failure here in terms of science communication and getting the warning and the message out. And so that inspired me to come back to academia, and I studied a PhD in volcano warning systems, which I completed. And then I came back and I was lecturing at Aberystwyth University for 5 years in the geography department. And then I was able to return back to my academic home of UCL in the Department of Science and Technology Studies.
Carina, what would you say you're an expert in?
Well, I'm one of those people that knows a little bit about a lot of things, but not a massive expert in any one thing. But the only one thing I really am an expert in is in volcano alert level systems. I am actually the most published and leading researcher in the volcano alert level system world. So that's where my real expertise lies. But I'm also an expert in warning systems for all natural hazards. So I've been looking at the core of what a warning system is and alert level systems. And I've also been very interested in art science collaborations. And I've done a number of projects mostly funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, looking at how we can bring scientists and artists and all other disciplines together in an interdisciplinary way to try and better understand and communicate some of the complex issues that we are facing in terms of the environment, such as, living in an anthropogenic era, how do we cope with climate change and what are the timescales involved in that, and thinking about geological timescales. So I've been able to bring my geology back into my art science work. And so those are really my sort of two key strings of expertise.
Fantastic. So back to volcanoes. What is a volcano alert system?
The problem with volcanoes, and actually for many hazards, especially when there's something you have to anticipate, is that a volcano, as you may see, can erupt like a beautiful volcano in Hawaii, like Kilauea, which is quite effusive with lava. And we're seeing that in Iceland at the moment. Many volcanoes are also very explosive. And the problem is that when they erupt, they can erupt at very, very short notice. And scientists do not yet have the capacity to be able to look into the crystal ball and say, hey, this volcano is going to erupt tomorrow at 3 p.m. And so the problem is that when it erupts, it puts out this really nasty stuff called pyroclastic flows, which incidentally are the most deadliest forces on the face of the planet. The challenge is we need to be able to evacuate people off a volcano or around a volcano before it erupts, because if you're doing it when it's erupting, it's too late and everyone will basically be killed, which is not what we want. So volcano alert level systems are really important because what they do is they help create situational awareness about what that volcano is doing. So it's going from doing nothing to starting to show some signs of unrest. And as we increase in certainty that, we're pretty sure this volcano is going to do something, we go up that alert level system. And it enables people and the public and government to implement the appropriate education, awareness programs, evacuation procedures and protocols in order to make sure that evacuation can happen as smoothly as possible with an understanding and buy-in by the public.
I think it was the first time we met, you gave me the example of the fire alarm going off and you saying, that's a warning system, Joe, and watch what people do when the fire alarm goes off. And now I'm like really aware whenever a fire alarm goes off to watch everybody, to watch what they do. And that's what warning research is all about, isn't it? It's about getting people to actually do the thing they need to do in order to be safe.
Absolutely. And, many people will think that a warning system is essentially just a siren or alarm, like a fire drill or fire alarm. And actually, the reality is that's only part of the process. And don't get me wrong, technology is a huge and an increasingly important part of warning systems. We use satellite imagery to have visual Earth observations about what's going on for hazards such as climate change, desertification, wildfires. Technology is absolutely vital to give us the data that we need and to help generate warnings. But when it comes to people actually needing to evacuate or do actions, just having a siren go off doesn't mean that people know what that siren is, what it means, what they have to do in response to get to safety. So that actually means that we have to embed our warning systems into long-term social processes. And this means, about having conversations with the affected populations and right through up to top level government in terms of establishing what are the hazards, let's understand them, let's know what we can do. Can we take an appropriate step that will get people to safety? If not, do we need to build something? Do we need to have another plan or something? And so it's a really long-term process, and you need to be doing this before the hazard, because if you're having this conversation where the hazard happens, it's too late. It's all about preparedness. So ironically, people think warnings are about response, but actually it's all about preparedness. It's about lining up all the ducks in the row so that when that event happens, everybody knows what to do.
So, Carina, you've organized the UCL Warning Research Center. What is warning research, and why do we need to do it?
The reality is that a lot of people kind of get the understanding of what a warning is and what a warning system is in a very, very basic concept. And so they think that they are developing or doing a warning system, but actually they have very little understanding about the multiple complexities and nuances that are involved. A good example, the International Federation of the Red Cross, absolutely brilliant at developing community-based early warning systems, going into communities, providing trainings to the local communities so that they can monitor a hazard, they can build the resilience that they need, and they are able to respond to a crisis when it happens as built-in capacity. And this, it is excellent because it builds that community's capability to warn and respond. But a government, for example, might not understand the nuances of a warning. And so, for example, with COVID-19, the alert levels that was developed for that was very much based on the system adopted for terrorism, for security. Now, of course, the terrorist alert level system is completely different beast, if you like. There's a lot of confidential, highly sensitive information. It's incredibly opaque, and we're essentially given, we're at this level of alert, and we have to trust the experts that that's what we're at because we can't access the sensitivity data. And of course, course, with COVID-19, that adopting that structure completely backfired because people were like, well, we want to know what's going on with COVID. What are the levels? At what level do we go to? At what point do we change level? What does that level mean? How is that tying up with our social distancing restrictions? And so there was a real confusion about it and a real opaqueness about it. People couldn't go onto the internet and find information about it and what the alert level was. And this is in contrast to, say, somewhere like New Zealand, where everything was transparent, it was very clear and very simply portrayed in their alert level system. A lot of people are doing it really well, but integrating it from a local to a national level is difficult. And some nations are doing it well on a national level, but there's not really enough research that's been done to say this is what's important about a warning system. This is what's working. This is what's not working. These are the things that you need to think about for different hazards or different political regimes. It's being aware of all of these nuances, and that's just not happening. That's really at the core of what the centre's trying to do, is trying to raise awareness in saying warnings are important. You may think you understand them, but they're actually really, really complicated. And here are the things that we need to think about. We need to learn from different hazards. We need to learn from different systems. We need to learn from different countries and approaches and lessons learned. Let's bring that together and see what we can do to make things better.
So, for example, with the COVID alert system in the United Kingdom, when that came out, did you have the sense that automatic sense that it was going to work or it was going to be messy?
When the system first came out, based on my PhD research, which was looking at alert levels of volcanoes in the USA, I instantly thought this is going to be messy. There's a lot of things that are not clear. Even when the Prime Minister Boris Johnson was presenting the alert level, he was also at the same time highlighting different steps that we were going to take in our social distancing restrictions and easings of those. And it wasn't clear how those steps fitted in with the alert level system. So instantly, within the sort of 5-minute space that it was presented, there was confusion created. How do these two things link to each other? And, the idea of it being a national alert level system, when of course we are a nation of 4 nations and Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales have their own systems, very similar, but slightly adapted to their own context. That was also a challenge. And then this idea again of it sort of being quite an untransparent and unclear process made me feel like I wasn't convinced that the alert level system was going to be very useful. It looks good and it's kind of comforting because you go, wow, the government are doing something about this. But it missed a great opportunity to actually be a useful tool, which is precisely what it was in New Zealand. In New Zealand, the alert level system gave a real roadmap of what you can and can't do in all sorts of different sectors at each alert level. And it clearly stated at which point you would be going from one alert level to another and what was needed to do that. And so it was really a roadmap for the New Zealand population to get back to normality, which of course they pretty much achieved, albeit, their borders have been pretty restricted. It was a missed opportunity.
It must be exciting for you to watch a press conference where somebody's talking about an alert system, a warning system, and you're thinking, yeah, this is my area of research. I know this stuff. And then as a minute passes by and 2 minutes pass by, and you start to see either super success or a car crash, it must fill you with a lot of emotions.
It's very frustrating. I mean, I've done some work on tsunami warning systems and alert level systems, but I think watching the whole COVID-19 alert level system saga made me realize how much I could apply my knowledge of volcanoes and other natural hazards to the COVID context. And it became really frustrating because I was like, wow, I can actually see that this is not going to work. And I can tell you why it's not going to work. And that was really frustrating because I actually was like feeling I wanted to talk to someone and say, look, you need to change this, or why didn't you ask for guidelines? Why is there no mechanism to get expertise to come into this before you issue the alert level system? And even before that, why are we developing an alert level system like post the crisis? Because this was in May, we were already in lockdown in March. Why was this not done beforehand, way before? Because we knew that having a pandemic was on the National Risk Register. We knew it was something that could happen. And so it's frustrating on so many different levels. And I think one of the really big things that I find frustrating as someone who is a bit of a polymath, but also someone who has direct expertise in a field that not many people do, is not being able to be heard or have a forum to express that expertise to help benefit society. And so that was a key frustration for me.
Yeah, you could see how in developing the UK system, where they basically took something off the shelf and then just changed some words in it and said, well, this worked in that context, it's going to work in this context. And you can see how an expert like you would say, nope, that's not going to work because it's a totally different context, and to watch that developing. But let me head in a slightly different direction, Carina. Let me come back to the Warning Research Center. How do you decide what warning systems you want to focus your attention on in this?
In the centre, we want to focus on all warning systems for all hazards. And that's why our core members and our affiliates who are associated experts from all around the world are from a diverse range of hazards, whether it's human-made, so we're looking at terrorism or technological crises or nuclear crises, through to natural hazards. And then to a certain extent, we also have the NATEC disasters, where we've got a natural event that creates a technological disaster like the Tohoku and the Fukushima nuclear plant meltdown. And then we have also the situation where quite often we're seeing lots of crises happening at the same time. So multiple hazards happening at the same time, or even events that cascade. So one event leads to another event, which leads to another event. And suddenly you get this domino effect and you find yourself sitting at home with no electricity because some random event has happened somewhere else in the world. It's really about giving the big picture. And that's what warnings are all about. Warning systems are about the big picture.
How do you think about warning systems for phenomena that happen over a very long period of time? And I'm thinking about, for example, financial risk or climate change or something like that. Is there a different vocabulary that you use as an expert to think about those kinds of issues?
You can classify warning systems in all sorts of different ways. And one of the key ways you can do is looking at rapid onset hazards. So that's things like, tsunamis, volcanoes, earthquakes. And then you have things like slow onset hazards. And that's things like desertification, famine, and of course, climate change. And they require very different things. When we look at a rapid onset hazard, usually it's either an event that's happened and we're responding to it, like a tsunami, it's created and we respond to it, or it's something that we anticipate, like a volcano, but it's still within a relatively, or can be within a very short period of time, or a tornado is another good example. With the slow onset, it's much, much harder to see those tipping points, to find those critical points in data where you think, it's more about taking that big picture and looking at that trend. And that's why I said satellite data and Earth observations are really good to give that bigger picture about seeing deforestation or predicting that there's going to be some famine events because there's not been much water or rainfall. And we're seeing, the impacts of climate change and warming occurring in different environments. So essentially, the Warning Research Centre is going to be looking at slow onset hazards, although they are, as I said, very complicated to actually provide warnings for. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because that's why we're dealing with precautionary policies around climate change. And that's why it's so hard to get people to actually do things, because it's always this idea that if it's going to happen, it's in the future, it's not going to affect me today or tomorrow. And so the key thing with climate change is just recognizing how it is impacting us on a day-to-day basis. And so by understanding that there's going to be more frequency of events and more intense events, like we're seeing with hurricanes, for example, in the Caribbean and across the USA, or flooding in Bangladesh, that we need to also incorporate the warnings that we do for individual hazards, because that's part of this whole sort of slow onset. So there is a relationship between the rapid and the slow onsets. They interrelate, and it's understanding that's also very important.
So, Carina, one of the things that you're an expert in is you're an expert in public engagement. So what is public engagement and why should we study it?
Public engagement is about engaging with the public. And that sounds very simple, but it's actually very difficult, because quite often what we see is scientists or different leaders in authority, whatever that might be, sort of just talking to or at the public, a bit like a lecture, really, just standing up and being talked to. And that's not really engagement. That's sort of one-way communication. And so public engagement is all about creating a dialogue, creating a discussion, and having real engagement with all the stakeholders, and to find solutions to problems, and to understand what's going on. Actually understanding, is there a problem? If so, what is that problem, and why is it a problem for this group of people and not that group of people? And public engagement is fascinating, and the line between public engagement and science communication and education is a somewhat fine line, but there's elements of that all wrapped in together. So it's vitally important that we do that.
I'm going to interrupt here. Let's take a short break. So, Carina, you were very busy yesterday doing something very important. You want to tell us about what you did?
Yes. Yesterday, I was invited to come and give evidence at the House of Lords Select Committee on Risk Assessment and Risk Planning, which is a select committee and an inquiry that's ongoing to try and look at the way that the UK is managing risk planning and assessment. And in particular, our session actually focused on communication. So they've been looking at lots of different aspects, lots of different risks, and inviting experts to come in and bring that information in the hope to improve things for the future. Obviously, it's not just about COVID. Obviously, COVID gives us a lot of things to talk about and has raised awareness of the need to be prepared and to potentially do risk analysis and planning better. So it was looking at lots of different things, but kind of triggered by COVID. What we've experienced with this pandemic over the last year, I think gives us a great opportunity to say, let's look at what we're doing. Let's see if we can do things better without apportioning blame, without saying, we did things terribly and what the consequence. There has to be a very sort of measured way of just looking at what's happened and how can we improve things for the future. And one of the particular challenges is, looking at potentially high impact but low frequency events, which of course a pandemic on a very global scale like COVID-19 is. So, it's not quite as remote as a super volcanic eruption, which in itself then leads to lots of questions about how we manage it. But it was a very interesting session, and I felt deeply honoured to be invited and be able to talk about the value of warnings and do exactly what I said, which is to help raise awareness of the value of warning systems and also how complicated they are, but how they actually get to the core of some of the complexities involved in these situations.
Carina, you're an expert communicator, so how do you prepare for something like that?
Speaking at a select committee is actually the sort of 10% part of the job. 90% of it is really thinking about what is it that you want to say. And I think for me, one of the best ways of thinking about it is if I was doing live radio, because when you're doing live radio, you get asked quite often questions that you don't know about, or you might have had some rough idea about beforehand. And you've really got to make things really succinct. You've got to really get to the point. And with radio, you've got to make sure that the public are able to leave that going, what is the point that person made, and why is it important to me? And so with the government, when we're talking to the government, it really is, about saying, this is the problem, this is what the solution is, and, and this is how we can do it. And so it really was about distilling actually quite complicated thoughts into, really succinct, punchy points. And actually for one of the questions that was asked, I think I literally said 2 sentences, because one of the questions that was asked was actually about, how can we encourage government and organisations to take notice on the report that is made as a consequence of this? How it's very well government creating all these reports, but how can we get them to do something about it? And my answer was really simple. It was basically, in my experience, money talks. And we know that for every pound that we spend on preparedness, we save £8 to £10 in terms of the impact of an event. So it's very simple. We need to invest in preparedness because it's going to save us money in the future. That's it. There's nothing else to say. What we need is leadership to help get that message across and let everybody else do their job. Because if we invest the money, people can do their jobs and make it happen. So I sort of said that in 2 very punchy lines. And sometimes less is more, because it's able to really convey a very strong point.
So we know that half the House of Lords listens to this podcast, Carina. So if is there anything that you wanted to say to them at the session that you didn't get a chance to say? Maybe we can pass it on now.
I was really pleased because actually I was able to answer every single question they asked, and I was able to make the key points that I had highlighted. So I had sort of different levels. These are the first things that I want to mention, and if I got time, these are sort of the other things that I wanted to mention.
Carina, I wanted to ask you just a little bit about your biography. Now, when you introduced yourself, you said a few things. So you started off studying geology, and you got into mining, and then you got into the financial sector. Can you say a little bit about that path?
At school, I really enjoyed physical geography and science. So I took a punt and I really liked being outside. So I wanted to study geology. So I studied geology at Imperial College at the Royal School of Mines, which was a great place to study geology. It's got great history. I really loved my degree. And then I wanted to get a job that could, do something with that. So I followed the main 2 options. One is oil and gas and the other was mining. And I thought mining was much more interesting. I wanted wanted to go into mining, and then I did an internship with Rio Tinto in Turkey, and I found it really fascinating. It's a really hard job because you have to be away from your family and your environment for up to 6-8 weeks at a time, and then you sort of fly home and have some home time. And I just felt that wasn't really for me, that I enjoyed so many aspects of life, such as theatre and friends and family, obviously really important, but just all these little things that you take for granted that, of course, we are now all realising with COVID. I essentially then wanted to apply my mining expertise. So I did that by working in the financial sector. And so I worked at Goldman Sachs for a couple of years, and I did a little bit of work on mining, but actually ended up doing a lot of work on mortgage companies and banking and supermarkets. And I was one of the few people that could see the financial crash coming. And then I got a job to work at a stockbrokers, and that enabled me to then work directly with mining companies. So I had a couple of clients in Russia, Far East Russia and South Africa, which was great because it meant I got to travel to these amazing places and do some work on different minerals and listing these companies on the stock exchange. But as I said, I really liked doing research, and I was always wanted to just sort of sit and do research. So I really wanted to do a PhD, and it was when that Boxing Day tsunami happened that I thought, actually, let me try and do some research. How can we communicate science better? What is the point of doing all this science if we don't put it into practice? And that was really what drove me.
So how does STS connect with that kind of career?
When I look at it now, I can see I was clearly destined to be in an STS department, because I remember when I did my A-level chemistry, my teacher said, "Oh, you know what we learned about how the atomic structure and the electron shells are at GCSE?" And he said, "Yeah, forget all of that, because actually we're going to look at it in a different way, and this is the way we look at it at an A-level, the A-level format." And I just thought, whoa, hang on a minute. So what, you weren't telling us the truth? There's uncertainty around science, which is like a fundamentally important concept that we all need to understand about science. So at that point, I started asking lots of questions, and I became intrigued on it. And I think, geology itself is actually a very uncertain science. It's all about looking at evidence and trying to create a history and a narrative, but there's no actually real definitive way that we can go and prove that. It's like, we do the best that we can. So it's a bit of an art form as well as a science. And I think that combination, ironically, by looking at rocks, you wouldn't think it, but that combination of art and science spurred my interest in interdisciplinarity. And in my PhD, I had to learn sociology and social sciences. I had to learn a lot of things. And I was very lucky enough to be supervised by many great supervisors. I had 3 great supervisors, but one of which was Professor Gail Davis, who, although she was in the geography department, also integrated a lot with this STS literature. And so as part of my learning of social sciences, STS was the bedrock of my knowledge. And that's how I really resonated with me, because STS is all about understanding how things work in practice. It's not just a theory that's intellectual sort of debate. I mean, they are intellectual debates, but it's also, how are things being done? What can we understand the world around us in a better way? And so, and how can we change that in terms of practice? And that's what's so appealing to me, because I'm a bit of a doer person.
What I like about the expertise you bring into the department, Carina, is twofold. One is you're not overawed by the science because you know it, so you can speak the language and you can interpret the material. And at the same time, you're not overawed by the economy. You're not overawed by the financial sector. You're not overawed by people saying, "Oh, we're going to be entrepreneurial."
What I love about STS is the interdisciplinarity nature of it, that we can look at the history, the philosophy, the sociology, the politics, the technology, whatever aspect it is. We bring those together to look at the problem. And I think increasingly the students that are coming through now are more aware of that. They can see very clearly what the complex problems are. And yes, of course, we still need expertise, but we also need people who understand about lots of different issues and can have the language and the skill sets and the tools to be able to work across those disciplines, to bring them together. And that's something I think older generations and many of the people who are sort of in powerful positions right now just don't have that capability. They think they're doing interdisciplinary work, but they're not really doing it. And so I think it's so important that we try and break down the silos that we've got, whether it's it's academic silos with our different departments, whether it's government silos with different agencies, whether it's silos within our communities and businesses and practices. We need to work across these and find mutual languages, mutual ways of understanding each other in a constructive way. And that is why STS is so important, because aside from it being a really fascinating topic, because science drives pretty much every element of our life every single day, it gives the key skills and tools and knowledges to do that. And I love the fact that our students can bring in the history of something when they're talking about politics, or like talk about the philosophy of something when they're communicating something. These things are all related. Having that wonderful, enriched depth, contextual knowledge of where we've come from, where we are, and where we're being, and when we're going to go is so vital. And that's why I think STS is such a brilliant topic. And I would very much like to see it being taught in schools. Many children do not go on to higher education. And I think it's really important that all children learn that science has uncertainty and that they understand the need to work across different knowledge sectors.
Fantastic. Carina, you have taken us to such a high note. I don't even know where we can go. I think the best thing to do is to say it's been fantastic having you on the show, and I'm really, really grateful for you making the time. Thanks very much, Carina, and we'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye now.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Goodbye.
Well, that's our show for today. What a great example of STS in the real world. Thanks to Carina for coming on to the show. I've put links to the House of Lords report in the show notes. I've also put in links for UCL's Warning Research Center and links for some of the other things Carina's been involved with. That's an impressive amount of stuff. WeAreSTS is a production of the Department of Science and Technology Studies at University College London. If you're wondering more about our degrees in teaching, just get in touch. We're always happy to talk. Music today included Rollin' at 5 by Kevin MacLeod. It's available from the website filmmusic.io. I'm recording this piece in the middle of December, so we're heading into the break between terms here at UCL, but keep watch on your usual podcast channel because we're going to fill a break with some more bonus episodes from the STS newsroom. These are great student projects. They'll give you the perfect reason to escape from whatever you're doing. Just put on those headphones and enjoy a bit more STS. Finally, you can find out more about the show, tell us what you think, and explore our programs just by visiting our website. Here's the address, so write it down. It's ucl.ac.uk/STS/podcast. That's it for today. Thanks for coming along. Till next time, everybody, I'm Professor Joe Kane, and remember that together we are STS. Bye now. You've been listening to We Are STS, a podcast from the Department of Science and Technology Studies at University College London. Subscribe to the show and join us online. The address, ucl.ac.uk/STS/podcast.